Welcome to another episode of SparkCom, the innovation community. How are you doing today, Adam?
I'm doing great, Manny. How about you?
Things are going very well. I wanted to jump right into today's episode and talk about globalization. And this is in response to some questions I got from people that have been having trouble with importing goods from overseas, in particular China. So it got me thinking about some of the micro and macro trends happening with globalization. And you've got all these opposing ideas about bringing back home to America, and you have these ideas of it's the same idea of when are we going to get back to normal, and it's all about these trends that are being amplified by the COVID pandemic. So I wanted to bring that to today's conversation and ask you, Adam, and get your thoughts on the idea of globalization in the post-COVID world.
Well, sure. Ever since Richard Nixon opened up the gateway to China, we've been becoming more of a global economy. And that trend is now, 50 years old, something like that. So it's been around for a long time, and it doesn't get as much attention as it used to. But it got a lot of attention around the turn of the century when we started to see a tremendous amount of manufacturing started to go offshore due to the lower cost of labor and other locations. Again, though, it didn't stop. I think what I liked about the topic of globalization is that we tend to think of trends as being, just a linear line. They keep getting, improving or going in their direction. And with globalization, we have an example where there's been a hiccup. Okay, we were globalizing, and then along comes a change in the administration in the United States, and we get some changes in administration in Italy and in the UK and in Spain, and what do we start seeing? We start seeing this hiccup happening in globalization, and tariffs come back, and we start seeing people trade less. And what I think people have to realize is that is a hiccup. It's a hiccup. It's not going to change the fact that the globalization trend of the global economy still exists. What we've seen is, tremendous negativity in terms of what it did to the global economy, right? We saw the growth rates of all countries decline, right? All the major countries, UK, Europe, the United States, China, India, Japan, everybody's economy growth rate declined. Now, you can have a lot of nationalism and you can have a lot of discussion about, all these other factors that might be part of that discussion. But the reality is that you can't contain globalization forever, right? So what's going to happen is we will go back to having a global economy. Well, it's either that or we're going to have a nuclear war. One of those two things are going to happen. We'd like to prefer that the nuclear war doesn't. But I think what for the last 4 years, it's been interesting to me because I've had a lot of people say, well, I need to change my policies. I need to think less about doing business in China. Like you said, I've got difficulties now. Or I need to think less about manufacturing in these other countries. And the point I've been trying to make to them is be careful that you don't make long-term decisions on short-term data, right? Right now, yes, we've got a change in administration, but how long is that likely to continue? Let me give you one data point that I think everybody needs to keep in mind. Either sometime this year, 2020, or in next year, 2021, China's economy will become larger than the United States. We will become the second largest economy of the world. China will have the largest economy in the world. If you think we have the opportunity to stop that economy, then you just don't understand how economics work. Now, they have so many more people than we have. The demographics are so huge. And the base in terms of manufacturing technology is so large that we really are in a situation where we have to work with China and trade with China to compete with China. If we don't, then they'll just keep getting bigger and we won't. And the outcome of that would be so horrific that within a few years, no matter who's in the administration, there would be a change back to globalization and opening up.
Yeah, let me give you an example from a couple of recent data points from both a CEO of a medium-sized company in China and shared with me some thoughts about globalization from the quote-unquote other side, from the Chinese side. So when I spoke to my former employee about what was happening with the global economy, in particular, he was helping to import some PPE, some masks. He said there was a very strong sentiment among his peers that the Chinese, the Red Dragon was standing up finally, and that the United States, and this guy lived in the U.S., by the way, for a long time, but the United States was going to take second position. And it was a very nationalistic, very not a very nice conversation that we had. And it was like, I'm sure how some of the rest of the world has felt about the U.S. for many years, beating our chest and all that. So I got a little bit of that from his angle. Then I had a conversation a few nights ago with the CEO of this medium-sized company in China, who also lived in the United States and kind of knows about how things really work in the world. And she had a very clear message to me. She said, look, we as in China need the United States as much as the United States needs China. And these little micro trends right now with the administration are only a speed bump in a very long, very expansive highway that needs to have a multi-level conversation. And she gave me a lot of hope that we'll get through this, in that, the policymakers are doing what they can, pro or against this union. But as we've said in the past, the market itself and capitalism, in any form you call it, either red, white, and blue capitalism or red capitalism, will prevail.
Yeah, I think people recognize now that bordered economies don't work effectively, right? Because you don't have all the resources you need. We're lucky in the United States in that we have oil, we have gas, we have plenty of sunlight, we have nice arable land that can grow crops. So we have most of the things you want. That's why for 150 years, really wasn't much of a need for a whole lot of trade. But not everybody's in that situation. And so then what happens is you start realizing, well, wait a minute, all this stuff, like we could grow 10 times the corn we grew, or we grow 10 times the soybeans, or 10 times the number of chickens, or the number of pigs, but we have to have a market for them, right? And so then you have the burgeoning export market that starts to develop around the world for these agricultural products, because our terra firma is so rich, we have so much rain and that kind of thing. One of the things that a lot of people in America aren't aware of is that we in the United States have this international policy, which is kind of like, oh, you've got a problem in your country, we'll give you some guns, we'll come in, we'll do some fighting. We tend to say we're going to support somebody, but it tends to be very militaristic. And then when the military action is done, we tend to leave. Yeah. About 10 years ago, the Chinese set up something they called the Belt and Road Project. And what they said was, we're going to go to these countries around the world, including Africa, where America tends to not play very much because we don't understand what's going on. We always feel like we have to pick sides and help somebody. But they would go to a place where they'd say, we're not going to pick sides. We're going to come into your country, or some small country in Africa, or a large one like Nigeria. And what we'll do is we'll help you build some dams, we'll help you build some roads, we'll help you do some things that will improve your economy. And they made themselves very, very friendly. They did this across South America, and they've been doing it across Africa. And the result is that they've developed a lot of really, really good relationships in countries where we either have no relationship, or we're just seen as sort of a militaristic, bit of a mean uncle kind of a leader in terms of how we would interact with them. And that is starting to show itself now pretty clearly when you look at how people are reacting to some of the short-term actions that have been happening regarding trade in the United States. They've been saying, oh, well, the United States, if you guys are going to be unfriendly or unhelpful, we'll just go do more business with China. We'll do that, and the Chinese, or we'll do more business with India. We'll try to figure out how to make it happen. India is not so much, because India has had more of a closed economy. They've only exported, and they've been very unwilling to allow imports. And so you see that happening with them right now, and that they don't have those friends around the world that the Chinese do. So again, what we have is a situation where if you look at it, you have more than half the world's population in these two countries, China and India, right? And to think that that demographic alone isn't going to have a major impact on every other country would be as silly as saying that somehow the number of people in the United States didn't matter as the country grew in comparison to Great Britain, right? Just growing your demographics, becoming large, makes you a major demand consumer, right? And therefore, people have to pay attention to what you're doing. And then when you get the size of China, where the economy is so big that they're able to do all their own exporting and balance that trade out, in fact, in their case, they have a big surplus where they export much more than they import, then you have to say the United States is no way you can just ignore that. You can't put tariffs on it and try to isolate your borders and think that this is going to come out good, because the end of this would be, and maybe as short as 10 years, the dollar isn't the reserve currency anymore. The reserve currency becomes the Chinese yuan, because they now have such better relationships around the world with so many different people that they say, look, we'd rather not deal with the United States we'll start dealing with the Chinese. I don't think
Yeah.
leadership of the United States, no matter who's in the administration, is going to sit back and accept that sort of an outcome. So those people that do this all the time, rather than as a political exercise, they're running for office every 2, 4, or 6 years. The people that do this all the time in the regulatory environments like the Federal Reserve, those sorts of places, they're paying a lot more attention to this, and they're like, okay, we're going to get this open, guys.
Yeah.
It's going to happen one way or another. And it's important for our small business people to realize this, because, like I said, you don't want to make long-term decisions on short-term data.
Yeah, and let me kind of give my thoughts on that, and then I want to shift the vision slightly to incorporate the bigger trends and as it relates to globalization and innovation. I think a lot of folks that I talk to, small business owners and startup folks, and even some medium-sized businesses, carry a fair amount of fear around what's happening with China. And you see a lot of polarization. There's not a lot of middle ground in that world. You're either understanding that we need each other, and this economy that was once just a local economy is expanding to the world. You either do that, or you have a very myopic, very closed mentality of it's got to be made here. Why are we exporting, or why are we importing all of our medical drugs? Why are we this? Why are we that? And there's a heavy dose of fear. And whenever I have a frank conversation with those folks, I kind of remind them that this is part of, again, a large trend that's been going on for 50 years, like you mentioned.
Right.
And the more they actually embrace the fact that globalization is here to stay, the more they can actually stay on top of it, and the less fear will consume them.
Right.
When if you look around what we surround ourselves with, there's so many things made in China, including the computers that we're on now, likely right now. And if you don't understand that, those giant trends, I don't know where you're going to be going in the next, 5, 10, 20 years.
One of the things that people have to build a skill for is learning how to look at the world through other people's eyes. We often tend to look at everything from our perspective, from our vectors, and we don't see things the way somebody else would see things. When you can start to do that, you'll be much better able to align with your customers, align with your suppliers, and align with trends. That's the biggest thing you want to do. So an example I give of this is to help people understand that if you look at the United States, we are a country run by lawyers, right? We're a nation of laws, and we were proud of that, right? But that's very, very inefficient. There's no central planning committee that's out there making decisions for people. We fight it out. We fight it out in the marketplace, and then we fight it out in the courts, right? And that's how we proceed. That's how we go forward. China's not like that. It's a country run by engineers. So a great example happened. There was going to be a big protest in China. And the leaders of China said, okay, where's the protest going to be? And the people got their permits and everything, just like they would do in the United States. And they said, well, okay, here's what we'll do. We'll provide buses to bus everybody to the protest. And the Americans immediately got very excited, and they said, well, you must support the protest. They said, oh, no, we hate the protest. They said, but what we don't want to have is we don't want to have all these protesters clogging up the streets getting to the protest. We don't want this to drag out and be clustered all around the place with people hanging out. So that's real problematic. So they're going to have a protest. We'll bus everybody there. They'll have their protest, and we'll take them back home. Very efficient. Very, very efficient. That didn't mean they liked it. In the United States, we're going through some protests now. Look how we deal with it, right? A bunch of people come out on the street, a bunch of police come out on the street, and it's just mayhem, right? Everybody's yelling at everybody, everybody's fighting with everybody else. Somebody's trying to decide who goes to jail, who doesn't go to jail. It's mayhem. And that's the way they look at us. It's kind of like, it's just chaos in the United States. You people are so chaotic, you're so inefficient, you don't know how to get anything done. Look, when we have a virus in China, we just make everybody stay home. Everybody stay home. We make them stay home. Now, when we control it. In the United States, you say, well, I wish you'd stay home. Oh, I wish you'd wear a mask. And people in other parts of the world look at that and they just think we're nuts, right? So when we think they're nuts, they think we're nuts. But that's because we're looking at this from very different perspectives. When you have that ability to stand back and say, wait a minute, what's the big trend? What's the win-win for everybody when you look at this? That's when you start seeing how the economy's blending together, help everybody get the wins out of it that they want. But these big trends, again, are big trends we can't deny. You can't deny the demographic trends, the growth of the number of people. We can't deny the technology trends. We can't deny these economic trends.
Yeah, exactly. Now, would you think that part of the strength of our economy or of our innovators, of the people, is our diversity? You have a big country like China with over 1 billion people that are extremely homogeneous on many, many levels, including a kind of a pink color of communism, right? They're not purely communist. They've got a capitalistic flair to that. So do you think that our diversity is our strength, or is our diversity our division?
It has certainly been our strength. A good example of this is to look at Japan. Post-World War II, we set up MINI in Japan, the Ministry of Industry and Trade, and they are a central planning committee for the country of Japan. And if you look, that economy, we were all worried that they were going to overtake us in the 1980s, right? But it didn't happen. Well, partly because you have a central planning committee that's looking and saying, okay, who's going to compete, what kind of companies, where we're going to invest. So very engineering oriented, right? But see, now what happens is you better be good, really good at making those decisions, because if you don't put your money in the right place at the right time, then what happens is somebody else can beat you. In the United States, we don't have that. We don't have the planning. So what happens is it allows businesses that are doing poorly, or markets that are doing poorly, products that are doing poorly, to fail. And that failure opens the door. Why? Because something else is doing better. So competition in that regard, what we call free markets, but competition moves our resources. Rather than resources coming from some group out of, some planning group, the resources are moved around very fluidly amongst companies. We use Wall Street and the banks to try to move that money around to the highest, greatest use. And that goes into the projects and products that keep doing better. And that's why with so many fewer people than they have in India or China, we are able to continuously, year after year, maintain the economic growth that we've had. But we won't be able to do that if we try to shut those other countries out, right? We have to take what we're good at, where we can put our resources right now, a lot of intellectual capital, a lot of technology development, a lot of innovation. We are the best in the world at that stuff because we get the resources to it quickly, much quicker than anybody else does. And then we can take and build the products out and sell them around the world. If we lose that ability to sell them around the world, or even have the idea for the product manufactured in China, sent around the world, that's where we're making our money. And when we lose that, then we're going to fall quickly. We would fall into third place.
Yeah, for sure. And, we talk about what place we're in, first, second, third, fourth, whatever. And I mean, you can look at different trends in different, health or the economy or the military or this or that. And I think it's important for the viewers and listeners to understand that, it's nice to know those numbers, but really as it pertains to their market, what they can actually affect and what the changes they can make in their world, I think it's important for them to understand that they need to focus on what they can change, right? What they can actually put attention to. You and I are not going to change the policymakers. We're not going to change, the lawmakers, the trade officials, and these big macro trends that we're part of, but we can't change those. But what we can change is how we relate to our everyday customers, how we deal with our own market, our own customer base, right?
Yep. So I have a really good friend. He's a structural engineer. He's a professional engineer. About 3 years ago, he took a retirement package, very early retirement package, because he had a huge amount of money sitting back in this thing. And he said, rather than just stay here, I'm going to take that and build my own little firm. What did he do? He moved to Guangzhou, China. Why? Because what I mentioned earlier, the Belt and Road Initiative, there were so many more projects coming out of there. And because it's central planning, you don't talk to as many people. When we do a project, you got to run around and talk to all the people that might want to be involved in building a project. There, it's all central planned. So it's very easy to focus on one group of people to figure out, how do we help these people? How do we figure out, how to get things designed, how to ensure the projects, how to make sure that they get completed. And so that's where, and that's an example of an entrepreneur taking advantage of this situation in the global economy.
Right. I understand. When we look at, I live here in Tucson. Obviously, we're an hour away from the border. And of course, my Mexican-American heritage, I'm fluent in Spanish, and I understand the economies as it pertains to the border. One of the trends I've been seeing recently that is, I guess, been happening for a while is the alignment between the governments of Sonora and the governments of Arizona. So Sonora is the state on the other side of Arizona. So I've seen a lot of alignment happening over the past 10 years between the two states. What I haven't seen, so alignment's one thing. What I haven't seen a lot of is action. They can talk about things and they can discuss policies, and then there's, sort of inching forward. Do you think that in order to compete in a bigger global economy, that the alignment between the North American, what used to be called NAFTA, it's got a new name now, Mexico and United States and Canada, do you think there should be more alignment, more action at the higher levels in order to take advantage of the world stage?
Well, again, I think what small businessmen and entrepreneurs have to be careful about is trying to think that they can, address those sort of giant issues. So the biggest thing to do is take a look and say, what's going to happen long term, and where do I put my resources? I think right now, we saw the continuing blossoming of the North American Free Trade Agreement. That went on for ever since the Clinton administration put it in place, right? And then it just kind of stopped. Well, but did it go away? No, because they came up with a new agreement, which is very, very similar. And so that's what, as entrepreneurs, we sit there and say, okay, wait a minute, what's the trend? The trend is towards globalization. Somebody tried to stop it in North America, couldn't stop it. So now what I want to do is make sure that I'm still aligned with that. So if you want to do manufacturing in Canada or manufacturing in Mexico or Central America, and you're thinking about doing business in those markets, I think you should do so, right? Because wherever there's people with unmet needs is the opportunity for an entrepreneur to make money. When somebody has underserved or their unmet needs, somebody can come in, meet those needs, and they can make a profit out of it. And that's what we're always looking for. And if you do that aligned with trends, then you're going to be successful. When somebody tries to stop a trend, observe that and say, wait a minute, that's creating more unmet needs. How do I find a way to take advantage of that and then be a participant in that marketplace?
Awesome. I want to, for the last few minutes of today's show, I want to kind of delve into a conversation I had with another friend of mine recently regarding what is the next trend in their market. And I want to understand from a practical level. We've talked about looking at the operations or the companies that are not in the center but sort of around, and that's where these trends come from. What other things can these small business owners do? And this gentleman is in the housing industry, and of course, housing in the United States has shifted from having a family build their own house and the homestead kind of opportunities we talked about in the past, to now you got these mega builders that stand up, 1,000 houses in a big development. And so he services that market. He basically does landscaping for that market. So he says, well, what's the next trend in that? How do I prepare myself? Where do I look for these trends?
Okay, the four big trends that I keep telling everybody they need to pay attention to are mobile, helping people to be mobile. Number two is the gig economy. Number three is asynchronous. In other words, not having to talk like we're talking, but being able to work and move in an asynchronous world. And the fourth one is adding intelligence to all of your products. So if we take a look at those and say, how could you, in building houses, help people with those trends? How can you help people be more mobile? So maybe you could come up with something where, we've got houses in multiple locations. And what we do is, if I wanted to go from Vegas and be down there for 2 years in Tucson with you, Manny, look at the problem I'd have. I'd sell my house, and of all the costs and difficulties to sell my house, go down there, buy a house, then do the reverse process in 2 years. That's really inefficient, right? Yet we live in a world where that's not an unusual thing to want to do. Could you come up with a program where you say, well, if I have Johnson Homes, what happens is I have my home in Vegas, and then I could just switch from my home down in Tucson, and then I can switch back in 2 years. See, that's helping people be mobile. It requires some very clever thinking about mortgages, property rights, etc. But you see, you're helping people along that. People want to be in a gig economy. Gig economies mean that I'm working on my own. Working on my own means I don't have a paycheck, means it's harder to get a mortgage. Right? Yeah. How can I help gig workers have the homes that they want? Right? And then, so that's another real, think about that. A gig worker, what's their life like? How do they make money? How can I help them have a home that fits their needs? And then maybe think the next one I would really pay attention to is the idea of intelligence, a smart house. a house that knows something about you, like knows when you're going to get up in the morning, knows all, a smart home. We've talked about smart homes for a really long time. There's a lot of technology out there now that people can use. Some of it's very expensive, like Crestron, and some of it is sort of more piecemeal, like the Nest type products. But there's a lot of products. The issue is that very few homeowners can put that together. Right? You have to hire somebody to come in. Builders don't tend to want to do it. Builders want to say, well, maybe I'll do some pre-wiring, but I don't want to get into those electronics.
Yeah. Okay.
There's a great opportunity. Can you help somebody have a mobile thought process where they are a gig worker and they got a smart home? If you do that, there's going to be a big demand.
Well, I just thought about something as we're sitting here. As we've mentioned in the last show, as the surprise, we're going to start bringing in people that are very innovative. And we've talked about a couple of them. I mentioned earlier a gentleman named Jim Cantrell, who's one of the original founders of SpaceX and is now launching a new company. I'm also thinking that we should maybe also bring in some startups with a really, really cool idea. And this particular one, the name of the company is called Stackhouse. And what they do is the sort of trend of putting a home in a shipping container, which are really novel and cool looking, but not always practical. What they're doing is they're building an infrastructure to be able to put your house in these things. And then if you want to move, they move the house. They literally put that stack house onto a flatbed, ship it around, and they want to bring in an area that has a bunch of these stack houses. So you can imagine a nouveau version of a trailer park, right? And you kind of couple that with the idea of these tiny houses. Have you heard of this trend?
Sure, absolutely.
And I heard from another friend of mine yesterday regarding the RV trend is exploding because people want to be able to go on vacation, but they're afraid of flying. They're afraid of staying in a hotel, again, because of this COVID situation. So they're renting RVs and they're buying RVs. And there's going to be a resurgence in the RV world, I guess, from what he was telling me. And so that's very interesting. And what are your thoughts about having Stackhouse maybe next Friday, next week?
Sure, absolutely. I mean, this is the kind of novel thinking that one needs to have. You apply it to the trends, start saying, okay, are the trends in your favor or are you working against the trends? In this case, I think it sounds like the trends are probably in entrepreneur's favor. And we could talk more about how to leverage those trends, how to get more into the tactics. Okay, now that I've got the trend, now I got the idea, what are the tactical, specific things I try to do to make it happen? And I think that we could get our hands a little bit dirtier with that kind of an approach.
Yeah, that sounds great. Well, I'm looking forward to our talk next week as well. Hopefully we can get Stackhouse in the house. And otherwise, we'll be bringing on some very innovative thinkers. I'm excited to talk to Michael whenever we get that set up. But thank you for your time, Adam, and we'll be talking to you very soon.
Have a great week, Manny.
Take care. Happy 4th.